tonight we're honoured to have Ignacio and Lupita, who are Sheikh in Mexico, visiting us. And Ignacio is also a wonderful turner. You almost sort of turn in slow motion. I never quite know how you do it. And where's Schnuffy?
On the list. Sounds like she's over there.
Oh, there's Schnuffy. I haven't got anything sort of dramatic to say today, but I wanted, hopefully you might have something to say, and you could possibly say how you're finding your training and any questions which are emerging from it, or if all of this makes any sense at all, or anything. So it's over to you. How are you finding the training? It's tough, isn't it?
Well, it's getting better and better every week for me. I'm starting to enjoy it.
Yeah. Well done. Yeah. As Helen said, this is the home run. And in the home run, it's actually quite difficult, the home run, because you're almost there, but often you get people suddenly panicking and they try to leave just right at the end and say, I'm never going to make it, I'm the worst turner ever. And that's a really common phenomena in the last few days. So as Helen warned you, be wary of twisting your ankle or falling off a ladder, or don't go stilt walking at this point. It's amazing, you're doing amazingly well. It looks like a real macabre, doesn't it, Ignacio?
Yeah. I was looking to them turning. To see the body working in that way and to see that they are falling in love, it's so present. Really, thank you.
Any more?
I wanted to ask you something about the philosophy that you told us that you've been talking about these past weeks. Is it something that's been taught in the schools of this particular sect of Sufism, or is it just a different way of saying it, or is it like maybe a broader version of it, which is more inclusive?
The way I've done it is over 45 years I've sort of got, in my opinion, down into the sort of essence of Rumi, and being a Collett House person for the last 45 years, I've also grown up in the Advaita tradition, a bit of Uspensky and the Mevlevi, and with quite a bit of help from Dr. Rolls just before he died, and how he wanted it to progress. It was like getting down underneath it to the essence of it, and then it sort of comes out in your own experience, in your own words. So rather than reading you lots and lots of quotes from Advaita and Rumi and Uspensky and others, it's more like it bubbles up in a new formulation each time. And for each person, each of us, you hear all these different things as you go through your life, and you'll have all these different experiences, and then your truth will come up in your own words, in your own voice. So it's a bit like that. Everyone's path in life is totally individual. So it's like all of our lives are an individually tailored course of yoga, especially suited for us, for realising our true nature. So it will come out for you in your own words. So what I've done is I've taken Dr. Rolls' understanding just before he died and how he wanted us to continue, and I've used that with Rumi to get behind Rumi's metaphors. So any point I'm talking about, I could illustrate it with 100 Rumi poems or metaphors, but because time is limited, I don't. So it's what Aldous Huxley described as the perennial philosophy. He said there's this philosophy which goes down through history and it bubbles up at all these different times. Doesn't it, Schnuffy? It certainly does. And so it's getting at the the philosophy that underlies it all, which is almost like a wordless philosophy, but you have to use certain metaphors when you're explaining it. So it's finding the simplest way to explain it.
What I liked about it is really not dogmatic at all. It's very open.
Yeah.
It's really interesting for me.
It should, if you get, is what that metaphor I used about all the wells, the Zen Buddhist well and the Sufi well and the Taoist well, when you get down the bottom of the well, you understand all the metaphors of all the other different wells, so you can explain almost any tradition, and you can explain the metaphors. There was a lovely story I read about one of Mr. Uspensky's pupils, Maurice Nichol, who, you remember that old late, hello Snuffy, Annie Brunston, who often reads the Dervish intro before a Macabre, was a pupil of Maurice Nichol's. And someone once read him a story about this group out in the Middle East somewhere in the late 19th century, and how they appeared, if anyone visited them, if a Muslim visited this group, they all appeared to be really good Muslims, and if a Christian visited, they all appeared to be really good Christians, and if a Buddhist visited the group, they all appeared to be really good Buddhists. And Maurice Nichol said that's the fourth way. So he was using one of Mr. Uspensky's terms, but it's like it's a tradition which gets behind the traditions, and you can incorporate any tradition into it. In India, I think they call it Sanatana Dharma, which means it's another word for Hinduism, which translates as eternal body of religion. And with Hindus, you can't really convert a Hindu, because if you tell them about Jesus, they'll just say that's another avatar of Vishnu, or Muhammad, another avatar of Vishnu. So it's like there's this universal underlying tradition which bubbles up and it takes on different metaphors. So that's what we're trying to get to, is what lies behind it all. And knowing you're all from different traditions, I have to try and do it in a way that incorporates all of you and doesn't exclude any of you. That's my job, isn't it, Schnuffy? And I have to speak cat language.
Does reincarnation fit into any of this?
Reincarnation's a very subtle one, and you almost have to explain quite a lot in the beginning, because if you go back in this process, the chain of identity, it all depends at where you put your sense of I am. So back here, if you go right back, like Rumi's story of the ants, and you go back into the I am everything, there isn't individual separate reincarnation, because you're already everybody. So you're already at this level, you're everyone who's ever existed and ever will exist. So at this level, you're both Hitler and Muhammad reincarnated. Everything, everyone you can possibly imagine. So concepts like reincarnation, in a sense, are metaphorical concepts because it applies to a limited level of identity. It applies to you still identifying with a separate self, even if it's a more subtle separate self. So it's all to do with where you place yourself in this spectrum. Ken Wilber refers to it as a spectrum of consciousness, which is a very good word for it. And as I mentioned before, in the near-death experience, if people have a very full experience, they go through this whole process of at one point feeling they're a separate self, even no longer with a physical body, and then they go deeper into the experience and they realise that they're absolutely everything and the whole visible universe exists within them, and then they can slip back along through here. So if reincarnation exists, I suspect it's infinitely more subtle than the linear time versions that we come up with our rational minds. Because even as science shows, time is just a product of matter. Once you move beyond matter, there's no longer any time or space. So if space disappears, time disappears as well. And most of our versions of reincarnation depend on physical time carrying on just as it does down here. So the reality is probably totally different from anything we can possibly imagine with our time-bound rational minds. But at the deepest level, you are everything, everyone who's ever lived and will live. To answer it at all?
Yeah. So the idea that we are stuck in the samsara and we have to wake up to come out. Could you say that we, like, somehow we are stuck between the physical and the subtle and just going round and round until you actually wake up to the true identity of the divine within yourself?
If you are stuck at that level, it's because that's part of the movie to be stuck at that level. So it's like what Rumi said about the reign of ignorance has to continue for some little time. And that's because without the misidentification of your true identity, there's no movie, there's no drama of life. So it's not an accident. If you don't realise your true self instantly, that's not an accident. That's how the movie has to unfold. So the ignorance of your true identity and what Buddhists might call being stuck in samsara is what gives rise to the movie of life and us all appearing to be separate. And then we fall in love and we fight, and that's how the drama of life goes on. But it might also be on your particular movie at a certain point to start to realise that you're not just a separate self, and then you get a much more different picture of it. In Tibetan Buddhism, they have a doctrine which they call Kala Chakra, and Kala is time. Kala means time, doesn't it, Schnuffy? And Chakra is a wheel or a machine. And the Tibetan monks create this huge great mandala which is called the Kala Chakra mandala. And I've got a beautiful old 18th century mural of it from Tibet. And it has all the sort of phases of the moon on it and all the sort of planetary things and all the different deities. It's got hundreds of deities in it which all represent the different astrological houses and things. And what Kala Chakra means is it means machine of time, and it's only a machine of time. It's devised so that separate beings appear to be moving through time towards nirvana, whereas in reality everything is already the oneness dancing, and at the deepest level everything is already fully realised and fully conscious. So it's like there's this machine or wheel which, like with the dance of Shiva, is just created in order to have a manifest creation. So, as I understand it, it's not like we're all lost in delusion and it's a terrible accident. Schnuffy, what are you up to?
He definitely is.
Yes, Schnuffy. So what it says is you don't have to worry. Everything's okay. It's all taken care of. There's no law of accident. Everything is consciousness. Everything is a one-mind dancing, and you're not really lost in delusion. And if you are lost in delusion, that's part of the manifest dance. As B. Griffiths put it, ignorance is a stage of knowledge. Does that answer it at all? More questions, please. Even from you, Schnuffy.
Oh, he's short, she's short.
So is suffering real?
Yeah. Suffering's very real at the level of suffering. I think I read you a quote earlier on in the course about how you almost have to have a both-and attitude. And what's wonderful about this model is you're both in time and in the world of suffering and pleasure and pain, but you're also, part of you is beyond suffering and pleasure and pain. And in the manifest dance, the dance of life, suffering is very, very real and has to be taken seriously. When you're in it, you know about it. But the great art of living is learning to access the part of you which is outside of suffering. And often in the macabre, the reason the macabre is so devastatingly difficult to do that's right, the reason the macabre is so devastatingly difficult to do is because that's how it's designed, and it cuts right through your psychology. And so you're so busy attending to the movement and where you are in the room and what Helen's telling you to do, but all of your life on the line of time disappears, and it has the ability to cut right through to this, right through to your true nature. I remember turning the day after the worst day of my life, and I was desperately in the dumps, and I turned in the macabre, and after it I just felt so happy, and I knew I was having a terrible time, but the terrible time was all going on over there somewhere, and I was here, not in the terrible time, but just feeling so happy. So, yeah, attend to this bit and take it really seriously, but learn to access this bit at the same time, and know when you are desperate that this bit is always there in the background, and when it's right for you it will manifest itself. But you get, particularly in the training, you get what are known as incentive bonuses, which is, incentive bonuses were sort of things that workers had back in the 1970s, I think, to encourage them to work harder. And I like the term incentive bonuses. So in the ceremony, in the training, you'll get moments when you suddenly feel incredibly happy, or you get great stillness or great bliss. And then the next lesson, you're back into real toughness, and I just want to be out of this room. I just want to get out of here. But then the lesson after that, you'll suddenly you'll get another incentive bonus. And it's the incentive bonuses which sort of carry you on and on. But the Buddhists all say life is suffering, and at that one level life is suffering, and at another level it's something quite different. So the art of living is both living in that and then learning to access the bit of you which is beyond suffering.
To some extent there is not identification with the incentive bonus, just as tragic as the identification with the suffering, because they're both essentially distractions from the true self.
Yeah. When you're very ill, I've noticed there's a part of you that isn't very ill, and the part of you which is aware that you're very ill actually isn't very ill. So quite a few healing methods are really all about taking your identity from the bit which is ill into the bit which isn't ill. And one of the great benefits of suffering, in my experience, is you gradually learn the ability, you learn to discover how to access the part of you which isn't in suffering. Even in intense physical pain, there's a part of you which is aware that you're in intense physical pain, and that part of you isn't in pain. So some healing, the one Helen does, your sacrocranial therapy, is about accessing what's known as the long tide, which is the great stillness.
There's no suffering in stillness, which is what I think I said at the beginning of the class. All healing is in stillness.
If you want to look at this, I sometimes, with 4 levels, I plonk it on top of absolutely every phenomena in life. So if you just look at modes of healing and illness, down here, physical level, you've got viruses and bacteria and toxins and anatomy and everything. So you've got illness at that level. And if you move here into the psyche, you've got psychological and emotional states, weaken the immune system and influence the physical body, so they manifest as the physical body. So you can see there you've got 2 clear modes of both illness and treatment. And then if you go up here, causal, it's what I think of the realm of what I call the blueprint, or almost like the wound up movie of your life. And it's almost like the seeds of illness, what in Schnuffy and Miranda might call miasms, are stored up at that level. And I've often observed that some people sort of smoke really heavily all their lives and live to 90 and are very fit at the end of it, and other people get illness as a result of it much earlier. So what I've observed is it's very difficult, if not impossible, to avoid what's stored at that level. It tends to manifest down here. And then again there's the divine, which is a part of you which is always beyond illness. So it's both beyond sort of illness and health. So again, a lot of methods, healing methods, that involved at realizing your identity at that level. And then it's almost like what I call transparency happens, which is why I've drawn these walls with dotted lines. It's almost like the light of consciousness shines right through and it comes right down. So that's why you sometimes meet people who seem to have this inner illumination, almost like a light coming out of them or coming out through their eyes. And then again, I put the level of 4 levels onto love and attraction. And so at physical level, you see someone you think's really beautiful, and you say, "Whoa," like this. And so that's sort of attraction. That's attraction at the physical level. And then when you start talking to the person, then you realise that you have things in common. So you might share a similar sense of humour. So you start to relate and start to fall in love, not just at the physical level, but also at the subtle level. And then with the causal being the realm of the blueprint of a movie, with some people you meet, you almost have a knowledge that you're meant to know that person. It's almost like what people refer to as destiny, or it's destined. It's like you and the other person have a particular role to play together in the great drama of life. So those are sort of three levels: physical attraction, then psychological and emotional attraction, and then this deep inner sense of knowing that you and the other person have a destiny together. And then you go beyond that into what is like when we bow across the skin at each other, which is realizing that everything is the divine, and that it's really just the self loving itself. So it's the one self seeing its reflection reflected back in the other person. So that's me doing my 4 levels of relationship. But down at this level, sort of different people often play roles for us at different times in our lives. So different actors, people play roles often very early in your life, then they'll disappear for 40 years, and then they'll suddenly reappear 40 years later and play another significant role. Don't they, Schnuffy? So any more questions? Sorry.
Can you talk about trust and faith? How important, and what sort of are they tools?
Faith's a great thing. In Sanskrit, they have a word called Shraddha, which means faith in the absolute based on direct experience. So, for instance, you know that the sun's going to rise in the morning when you go to sleep at night, because it always has done all through your life. So when you go to bed, you're not really in any doubt that there's going to be a morning at some point. Is going to follow it just because of your direct experience of all the past mornings you've seen. And with Shraddha, it's like when you observe your life and you look back at your life, if you're observant, you'll see how there's this pattern in its unfolding. When you're actually in a small section of time, it appears chaotic, and often everything's falling apart, and you've just lost your house, and your partner's gone off, and your work's ended, and it seems chaotic. But then 20 years on, you look back, and you think, my God, that was so perfectly done. And that if that hadn't happened, that would never have happened. And if that hadn't happened, that would never have unfolded like this. And you begin to see what an immaculately composed drama it is. And when you see that enough, then you get this faith in the unfolding of the cosmic movie. And that's what they call Shraddha. So it's faith in the absolute, which admits no doubts, but it's based on direct knowledge, rather than faith which is blind faith, which is not based on direct experience. So trusting is an amazing thing. You trust in the absolute. When you're in a really tough situation in life, a great thing to do is just internally to hand over and just say, I trust the absolute, or whatever words you use, the universe, whatever your metaphors are. But in my experience, everything seems to sort itself out long term with trust. I've got a little thing. Dr. Rolls told a story about an American businessman in New York who had something called the Wednesday Worry Club. And every Wednesday all these businessmen would get together, and if they had a worry, they'd write it out on a bit of paper and put it in a box. And then the next Wednesday they'd all meet together again, and they'd look in the box and look at the worries. And the next week 90% of all the worries had disappeared, and the ones that hadn't disappeared they just put back in the box till the following Wednesday. I've got a thing called a worry pot. It's an old French pot, olive oil jar, and if I've got a worry, I write it down and I put it in my worry pot. Then I can forget about it. And now and again I look back in the worry pot and see that most of the worries have disappeared.
Thank you.
Any more?
Schnuffy doesn't seem worried.
Schnuffy's not worried. Mr. Uspensky said that cats remember themselves all the time, except when there's fish around. Then they forget themselves.
I have a question about animals, actually.
About animals.
I can't remember, or I haven't read yet what Ken says about animals. Can you tell us about animals?
I can only tell you from my experience of animals, and in the near-death experiences, there's one really good one that Peter Fenwick records, where there was this man who had lived a lot of the time in the Himalayas because he was in the Indian Army, and he'd had lots and lots of dogs and cats. And in his near-death experience, just before he died, he had this vision that all the dogs and cats he'd had all through his life came running to meet him, barking and meowing and licking him and jumping up and down all at once. And then he came back into consciousness and was able to relate what he'd seen. And then a few days later he died. And I had an experience also here where I had this wonderful cat called Brown Puss, and me and Brown Puss was such good friends. I used to sit painting and Brown Puss would always just sit on the bed behind me looking at me, and I'd had Brown Puss about 17 years. Then one day I came up here and I was doing the movements to music upstairs, and it was 1986, and I was doing a really beautiful movement from Russia called the Big Prayer, and I was at the back of the room, and suddenly I knew that Brown Puss was right by me on the floor, and Brown Puss said, "So this is where you come when you disappear."
Oh.
And when I got home, Brown Puss was dead.
Oh.
So that's sort of my direct experience of. Ken Wilber's a bit dismissive of anything beyond death. He's got a very much a sort of Buddhist viewpoint, so he can be a little harsh in that department. But if you look at all the evidence, I think even Ken Wilber's going to get a surprise when he dies.
He had a nice dog at some point.
Yeah.
But most of the near-death experiences, the ones that I've listened to with you, they nearly all express deep love. That's what they're being completely held in love.
Yeah.
Which is pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That divine eye is just pure love.
Yeah. And all the animals are included in that. With screens, it's like you sometimes get the metaphor of a screen of consciousness where there's images. So going from top down, here on your screen of consciousness you have a multiple physical world. And looking from top down, you give birth to that whole physical world. Every time you blink, you create the whole world anew, because the world is re-manifest on the screen of consciousness. So all the animals, from that level, everyone, all the animals and everything else, you create yourself as consciousness. So all the animals and all your friends and all your grandmas and your grandfathers and everything else is all contained in you as consciousness. So from the top down, nothing is ever lost. So all the people you love are all still there within that oneness. But down here at the level of the movie, and we don't know that most of the time, then people appear to die and our beloved pets disappear, and it can be very desperate. So that's a benefit of turning your perception around. But just, again, with the incentive bonuses, my experience is that the one consciousness gives you all these little indicators all through your life. You'll notice things which appear to be coincidental, which aren't really. You'll get these little glimpses. Does that answer it at all? They don't believe Mr. Wilbur all the time. He can be a little harsh.
I have a question. So if we say that we don't have control over anything, then why in the end is written. So we make a lot of efforts to do a few things or even to take care of somebody. And at the end is like, it's not in your hands what will happen. Is that something true? I don't know. I always think about it.
It's a very good question. You say, is it in your hands? It all depends what the you call you is. Because mostly we identify down here as you or I, whereas probably that's an illusion. So probably the you, this is probably the only real you or I. So from that level you create and destroy everything. So you're the one mind, so it is in your hands at that level. Down at this level, and taking ourselves as separate individuals, and you're on your journey through life, my experience is that going through life you get grabbed by all sorts of different things. I want that lady to be my partner, or I want that house to live in. And you can push all you want to make that person your partner, or you can push all you want to try and get that house. But in my experience, if that's not on the movie, then whatever you do, it's not going to happen. But having exhausted yourself trying to make something happen which doesn't happen, then suddenly something which is infinitely more suited for you suddenly appears left of centre, and you think, oh my God, and that builds up what we were talking about, the Shraddha and the faith. So from this level we don't know what's right for us or what our particular destiny is, but from this level you actually do. You know the whole of the whole caboodle. So down here you'll push in all these different directions, and if it's not for you, it will just close up eventually. Sometimes avenues open up a little way and then it just closes down, and then you get pushed back on your path and then another avenue opens up. So life, in my experience, your experience might be different, which is equally valid. In my experience, that's how life continues. But when you look back at it, you sort of see it was immaculately arranged.
So are you saying that free will does not really... Why are you laughing?
Because this is his favourite question. Go for it.
Go for it, pal. Let's see how far you get.
I'm asking if free will is only at the subtle and physical level, and basically we don't have free will at that level, and we tend to have more, perhaps. It makes more sense, free will, as you move up the...
You think you have free will down here. I'm not going to say you do or don't, because you might come over and punch me. But I would say down here you think you have free will. So I can say I'm going to lift my arm up. There it is, I've just done it. So that could be a demonstration of free will. But using the Einstein analogy, there's always a bigger will behind the will to will the will. So then you say, where did that thing to lift where did the inspiration to lift my arm come from? So you go back, it came from the subtle level. And if you follow your thoughts back, everything seems to emerge out of this great stillness, which is your true nature. And even modern science shows that the brain, there's parts of the brain which deal with decisions, have already started working quite a while, a whole second almost, before you're consciously aware of a decision which you make. So it's like, okay, that's just the mechanism, but my experience is that everything is the dance of oneness, and physical and subtle is just the vehicle of consciousness, the vehicle of oneness. So the word ego, used in a derogatory sense by mystical traditions, is simply thinking that your mind-body is separate and is a separate doer, whereas real ego or real I is realizing that it's all part of just one whole. With the whole concept of free will, I'd rather you just observe it in your life and observe where your thoughts and feelings and desires and decisions arise from, and observe who you are. So the whole question is not, is there free will or isn't there, but who is the I that wills the will? So who am I is a fundamental question you have to ask before you can ask, is there free will? Because is there free will has no meaning at all. Is there free will for what? It's like saying, does my motor car have free will? So you have to understand the nature of who you are, then you understand who's doing the willing. But it doesn't really matter. Your life's going to go on anyway. But you have to answer it for yourself, ultimately. But my observation of it, again, is my observation of life, is looking back on it, it's like I can't believe how well it's been composed. And it's included total sort of disasters, when 10 years of everything falling apart, and then miraculously, without me doing anything, it all suddenly pulls itself all back together again. So it's like life is this journey where you set off on a journey and you go along the open road and you get in a swamp, and then you get lost in the jungle, and you're out in an arid desert, then you're back on this happy open road again. And everyone's life has a combination of all those different things. But when you observe it from a higher, bigger vantage point, in my experience, you'll see that everything seems to fall together. And you think, my God, I could never have worked that out, and I could never have composed that. If I could really do what I wanted, I would have been married 100 times to the most unsuitable women possible. But mercifully they weren't on the movie, and one was who was actually well suited to me. Can I read you a bit which sort of explains it? If I can just track it down. It's a very difficult thing, it's my favourite subject, it's quite difficult to verbalise. Okay, this is Joseph Campbell, the great American mythologist, and he's quoting Schopenhauer, and he says, that's right, Schopenhauer, in his splendid essay called On an Apparent Intention in the Fate of the Individual, points out that when you reach an advanced age and look back over your life lifetime, it can seem to have had a consistent order and plan, as though composed by some novelist. Events that when they occurred had seemed accidental and of little moment, turn out to have been indispensable factors in the composition of a consistent plot. So who composed that plot? Schopenhauer suggests that just as your dreams are composed by an aspect of yourself of which your consciousness is unaware, so too your whole life is composed by the will within you. And just as people whom you will have met apparently by mere chance became leading agents in the structuring of your life, so too will you have served unknowingly as an agent giving meaning to the lives of others. The whole thing gears together like one big symphony, with everything unconsciously structuring everything else. And Schopenhauer concludes that it is as though our lives were the features of the one great dream of a single dreamer, in which all the dream characters dream too, so that everything links to everything else, moved by the one will to life, which is the universal will in nature. It's a magnificent idea, an idea that appears in India in the mythic image of the net of Indra, which is a net of gems, where at every crossing of one thread over another there is a gem reflecting all the other reflective gems. Everything arises in mutual relation to everything else, so you can't blame anybody for anything. It is even as though there were a single intention behind it all, which always makes some kind of sense, though none of us knows what the sense might be, or has lived a life that he quite intended. That's Joseph Campbell on it. I love that description. But it's such a difficult thing to rationally verbalise. You almost have to go through life and just sort of notice it. But this bit, the separate bit, can be very sort of pushy and manipulative and want to produce certain results. And those results might happen, in which case you might say, aren't I wonderful, I did that. Or they might not happen, in which case you might get very frustrated. But my experience of it is, if it's not something which is on your particular movie, then the avenue closes down very rapidly and you get pushed back onto your true path. Even the deviation was part of your path, because it wasn't really a deviation, because it showed you where your path was.
In Italy we have a lovely saying, se sono rose fioriranno, if it is roses, they will bloom, and if not, it's not going to bloom.
That's a fantastic saying. In Zen Buddhism they say spring comes and the grass grows all by itself. Any more meaty questions?
I just wanted to ask you one thing about that. How does one remembers when we are in the physical realm and we get lost into suffering, pain, anger? How do you remember the divine in everyday life? And because there is also the danger of once you know this concept intellectually, you might fall into something called like spiritual nihilism, which like you realize none of my action really matters, so why would I even try to do anything? So how do you balance this out and still serve your fellow human beings while you know the truth that you want?
That's a very good question. The spiritual nihilism thing happens really because we talked earlier about immanence and transcendence, and how in the ancient Vedic tradition, before Shankara, it had become that reality was transcendent. So that means you retire from life and you go beyond, and life in the world has no relevance and no meaning. And then with the rise of Advaita and Tantra and other philosophies, it was taught that reality is both immanent and transcendent. So that means that this is equally the manifestation of that. So consciousness isn't just something which is over there and remote. Consciousness is immanent. Matter is the very substance of consciousness. It isn't only the manifestation of consciousness, it is consciousness. So then you're giving equal weight to both inner and outer worlds. Later on, inner and outer disappears, but for the purposes of looking from this point of view, there's an inner world and an outer world. So if you get lost in this, then it can become nihilistic. And that's what I mentioned at your first or second meeting, that in my opinion, some of the Neo-Advaitin teachers...
Like Alan Watts, do you think he falls...
Alan Watts isn't too bad. He's Zen Buddhism, mostly. Yeah. There's been some more recent ones who dismiss the physical world and say it's of no importance at all. With accessing this fully, you also access this fully. So it's what we taught about, it's a total empathetic unity. So the unified state, fully, you realise that everyone else is also you, and you treat everyone else with love and compassion and consideration, and you treat all the animals in the world around you with love and compassion because it's empathetic. If you're a narcissist or a psychopath, then you have no empathy and you have no feelings for your fellow human beings, so you can do anything to them and that doesn't jar with you. But if you're an ordinary person and you're fully empathetic, then you treat everyone in the way that you yourself would want to be treated. So you treat everyone in a kind and considerate way. Was there more to your question? I'm just trying
Just remembering.
Remembering, yeah. Just on a practical level, there's nothing better in life than the concept of repetition on the day-to-day way of achieving things. So just with, for instance, my painting abilities, they've come about because of repetition over years and years of practice. And with remembering your true nature and the true nature of reality, you just have to start and then start to make a habit of it. So then things very rapidly become habitual. So what I do in my life is when I've done a painting, I look at it in wonder and say, goodness me, thank you, God, where did that come from? And now I do it every time I sort of do a brushstroke, I'm sort of thinking, oh, isn't God clever? And the same when I go outside and I look at the sky and the trees and the rain and the mist and the wind, I go, oh my God, that is so clever, God. See, it's almost like you set up this sort of personal dialogue of thanking him, her, all the time. And if you start doing that, then it will become so habitual, you'll do it all the time. And if the concept of God is too big, you can have what we mentioned, the Devarista, which is a personification. So you can have Jesus or Muhammad or Rumi or Buddha or Lao Tzu or Krishna or Vishnu or 100 others. Does that answer it?
Schizophrenic last night was recommending the practice of gratitude early in the morning and lasting at night. And he said if you hold it for 6 weeks, then it becomes, ingrained.
Isn't that nice?
You don't have it becomes automatic, and your neurons, whatever happens in the brain.
Yeah,
but it's so important, which is what you're just saying now.
Well done, Peter Fennick. Peter Fennick and I used to write papers together through the 1980s. I used to go round to his house, and his wife Otta would cook supper, and by the end of the evening we'd have a paper written. Any more, or do you want to go home now? Woolly. You want to go just Woolly? Last question.
I don't know if I missed one class where you read the I'm Amazed.
I am amazed.
But I'm coming to these classes especially for it. It's my favorite.
Okay. I think I've got it with me. If not, you'll have it next week. I read it at the first one. Or was it the second? No, it's the second one actually. Next week I'll do the macabre symbolism. Because the macabre is such a wonderful metaphor. And the whole teaching is contained in the macabre, so everything we've talked about is all in the macabre. It's going to have to be... No, it's going to have to be next week. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your questions, they were great. And thank you, Schnuffy. Wherever you are. Thank you.